Hello. Today I want to talk about real GDP, nominal GDP, gross national product, and NNP. So to begin, let's consider a very simple economy. I know economies can have millions and millions of goods, but for this example, I'd like to talk about an economy with two things: bread and butter. Two things. And I say here, no economies produce millions of goods and services. I'm just choosing two for simplicity. Okay. Each good has an individual demand schedule and supply schedules from the producers. So this is the individual demand schedule. That could be myself, Mr. Zach. At the price of 1, the quantity demanded is 10. At the price of 2, the quantity demanded is 9. At the price of 3, the quantity demanded is 8. At the price of 4, the quantity is 7. So this is the individual demand schedule for someone like me, just one person. This could be one of my students. Again, this is for bread. And in this market, there's just 3 people who buy bread. It's very, very simple model to show you how each of these things work. Now, once we have the individual demand schedule for bread, we see that we add up each of these quantity demanded at each price here, 10 plus 6 plus 6, to get the market demand schedule for bread. So that's at price of 1, the market demand quantity is 22, the market demand quantity at price 2 is 15, 3, 11, and at the price of 4, the quantity demand 7. So I'm just adding those across here, and you can see how I added it here, here, and here. So this is the market demand schedule for bread. Now butter is down at the bottom. This is the individual demand for a person, for an individual. This is another individual, and this is another individual. So once we add these individuals together, and I did it here, 8 plus 5 plus 3, that's 8 plus 5 plus 3, we get a market demand schedule for butter at the price of 1, the market demand, quantity demanded is 16, at the price of 2, 10, and so on. So now we move on. This is the market demand schedule, but this is what the consumer wants, but these are the producers. These are the producers of bread, and these are the producers of butter. So we call these a supply schedule. At the price of 1, this firm 1, produces 5 loaves of bread. At this price 2, 10, 3, 15. At this price of 4, 20. This is what the firm 1 produces. I'll get to why I made this red in a little bit in this video. The price, this is the second firm. This is what a second supply schedule producing bread. Each one of these firms is a bread maker. This is firm 1, bread maker. This is firm 2. At this price, this bread maker makes 3. At this price, this supplies 5, and so on. So the market supply schedule is the combination. 5 plus 3 gives me 8. 10 plus 5 gives me 15. At each price, what the 2 firms produce in that market supply. So this is the market supply for bread here. And you see I did the same thing here for butter. There. So the market supply schedule is 2 plus 1 gives me 3. So at this price, butter, these 2 firms make 3 butter. Okay. At this price of 2, between these 2 firms, 6 plus 4 equals 10. At this price, the quantity supplied is 12, 4, and 19. Now, yes, please keep in mind that this is just a quick example. There are millions of services and products that a country can make, but I just choose 2 of them and said, let's pretend that this is a country A, an imaginary country, so I can show you how real GDP and nominal GDP works. Okay. Now we move down 2000, in the year 2000, the year 2001. I'll get to this side in a moment. But for right now, I want you to focus on the aggregate demand at the price of 138, at the price of 2, 25, at the price of 3, 18, at the price of 4, 10 aggregate demand. And this is the quantity supplied from the previous slide where we aggregated all the economy together. So just a second here, let's go back up here so you can see where I got these numbers from. Once I calculated the market demand schedule for bread and for butter, I added these together, 22 plus 16, to get the price of 1. That will give me 38. See? Let's go back up a little bit more. half screen. So you can see the two market demand schedules. Remember, the individual demand curves add together, sum together to form the market demand schedule. The aggregate demand schedule is the sum of the market demand schedules, or actually the sum of the individual curves. So the individuals demand schedules form the market demand schedules, and the summation of these two market demand schedules create the aggregate demand schedules. Everything is summing in macroeconomics. So here, at this point here, 15 at the price of 2, the market produced 15 units of bread and 10 units of butter. So you can see it here, 25, 15 plus 10. And I did that and so on. Here the supply is 8 at the price of 1. This country, this fictional country, produced 8 units of bread and 3 units of butter. So that's where this 11 comes from. It's the aggregate of the aggregates. Okay, so two firms came together to form this supply schedule, the market supply schedule. These two firms form this, and the aggregate supply is the sum of the market supply curves, which generates this down here. Okay, so once we have the aggregate demand and aggregate supply summed from the individual demand curves and the supply curves from the firm side, we have aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Notice that the market equilibrium is at the price of 2, where aggregate demand, 25, equals aggregate supply. This is the market, the macroeconomic market equilibrium. Okay? So now, what is GDP and nominal GDP? So assuming that only the macroeconomic market equilibrium quantity is produced for this economy, the normal GDP and real GDP are calculated as follows. Nominal GDP is the current year price times quantity. So the current year price in 2000 is 2 times 25, which is 50. Okay? This could be 50 trillion. In this example, just say 50. The units is just an imaginary country. So just for now, say 50. The real GDP is the base year times quantity X times quantity. So the base year, which is 2000, meaning the beginning, just the beginning year, 2000, the price is 2 times 25. Now, at first, they are the same because there is no, this is the base year. The nominal GDP uses the base year, and so does the real GDP, but that'll change in the beginning. So, in a few moments. So what we see here is the aggregate demand and aggregate supply produces an equilibrium, and this is the quantity times that price for the specific year at the current year times the price and the base year, which happens to be 2000. Okay, that's how real GDP and nominal GDP is calculated. It's calculated by taking the price and the quantity of the aggregate demand and the aggregate supply schedule and multiplying it to get the output level. Now, in 2001, we have something different. This is year 2000. This is our base year. Let me write that in there. Base year. Okay. This is the next year, the following year. Okay. In the following year, notice that the market equilibrium has changed. It is no longer at the price of 2. This is the price of 3. Now, the reason why the 3 is changed from 2 to 3 is that in 2000, the sum of the individual demand curves define the market equilibrium at the price of 2 and 25. But the year 2001 is a different year, so the equilibrium can change or it can stay the same. But in this case, the equilibrium changed, and the price is 3 and the quantity is 34. You can see here on the equilibrium. Now, to calculate the nominal GDP, we take the current year price, which is 3. You can see the colors matching up, times the quantity, which is 34, and we multiply that together to get 3 times 34 is equal to 102. Okay, that is the nominal GDP for that specific year. The nominal GDP always takes the current year times that current quantity multiplied together. So this current year is $3, and 34 quantity we multiply together. Okay, like so. Now the real GDP has changed now. Real GDP is about how much the GDP is reflected by inflation. So to account for the change in GDP based on a change in price and quantity, what the real GDP does, it multiplies the base year. This is see the color code to match the 2 and the 2 here. The base year price times the new year quantity, 34. Okay, so now you see 2, before it was 2 times 25, but now it's 2, the base year price, and now the new quantity. So what this does, it takes an account of, see the changes between prices here, $2 and $3. This says how much of this change, 102, is a result of a change in price. So that's the difference between the real GDP and the nominal GDP. The nominal GDP will take the current price and multiply it times the quantity. The real GDP is interested in how much a change in price affected the GDP. So the real GDP takes the base year price and multiply it by the current output level. And what we have is a difference, 102 and 68. Now, you may be asking yourself, why are these numbers important to an economy? Well, the first major goal of a macroeconomic economy is to keep prices stable. We do not want our growth to be defined by inflation, which is this change in price right here. This is why we calculate real GDP, in order to see if our growth is based on actual production, or is it based on raises in price. So this is why we calculate the real GDP. Okay, now, why are these important? Again, why are these numbers important to the economy? Because the nominal GDP doesn't tell the complete story. If you look at the nominal GDP, it went from 50 to 102. And if we look at the percent change, new minus old divided by old times 100, the percent change says that this economy, GDP, is growing phenomenally. It has grown 104%. In fact, that means that the GDP has more than doubled. Okay, so normally people would say, yes, that's very good. But an economist would ask, why? Well, let's look at the real GDP here. So if we look at the real GDP, we see that 102 divided by 68, this is the change in GDP here. 102, this number, 102 divided by 68 times 100 give us a GDP deflator of 150. Now the GDP deflator gives us an indices to see how much of growth is determined by price, inflation. So when we calculate this number, a GDP deflator equal to 100 means that there is no inflation. So we could do that by looking at the first year, base year. Now, because it was the base year, there was no inflation. There was only 1 year that we were calculating. So very quickly, if I look at my nominal GDP of 50, and I divided by the real GDP in 2000, because it was the first year, there was no previous year. Prices does not have the chance to increase. I get 50 divided by 50 times 100 to get the percentage change, times 100. And what I'm left with is 100. Surprise, surprise. That means that the price, that the quantity and price were 100. There was no inflation. Okay. Now we compare that with our current GDP deflator, 150, and we take the difference, and we find the difference to be 50%. Okay. So interpreting this 150, an economist would say, yes, the nominal GDP in 2000, between 2000 and 2001, increased by 104%, meaning the nominal GDP has more than doubled. However, the majority of that, between 2001 2000 and 2001, has been explained by price increases. According to the GDP deflator, between 2000 and 2001, inflation increased by 50%. So economists look at changes of prices to see how growth, what is really growth. Is it just growth because of price increase, or is it growth because of productivity? And comparing the nominal GDP with the real GDP is a way to see whether it was actual productivity growth or just raises in price. So the first major goal of a macroeconomic economy is keep prices stable so that you won't see large inflation defining growth. Okay. The next is unemployment, because they want to make sure that productivity increases and not necessarily price. So if there are more people working, they're able to produce more. So these are the three major goals of a macroeconomic economy. And growth, of course, is talking about real GDP growth. Real GDP growth. We want to make sure that our real GDP is growing and not our nominal GDP, because the real GDP tells the complete picture of the economy and not just based on inflation. It takes an account of an inflation. Okay, so to calculate how much growth, economists will take the new real GDP, which is typically a percentage, new minus old real GDP, and you guessed it, and divide by old real GDP to calculate. Okay, so in sum, nominal GDP is to say how much the price is at the current price times the quantity. The real GDP takes an account of inflation. So this is what economists use to see whether the growth is based on changes in price, inflation, or based on productivity. That's the difference between nominal GDP and real GDP, and how real GDP is used in the economy. The next topic is GNP. Now, GNP is almost the same as GDP, except for a critical letter change: GDP, GNP. The N stands for gross national product. GDP stands for gross domestic product. Now, gross domestic product includes all goods and services created within a country. Now, GNP is important because, going back to our original supply schedule of bread, this red firm here is a firm that operates within our imaginary country, but our country, let's say, is Singapore. Actually, let's say our country is country A, okay? Our country A. Our country A is an imaginary country that I created. So these are the market supply schedule of these firms in our country A. The gross domestic product is about all firms within our country that is building bread and butter. So in our country A, that's firm 1, firm 2, firm 3, firm 4. That contributes to GDP. Now the difference is GNP is this firm 1 happens to have a factory within country A, but those firm 1 is from country F, another country. So another country has come to our land and produces bread, even though they're foreign. So you can think of like the United States of America, for example, and United States of America produces millions of products, but people from China and Kazakhstan and Latin America have opened firms within the United States. You see? So moving back to our example here, we have country A, the gross domestic product, or all of these products produced within country A. However, Country F is from outside. It's an outside country that happens to have a factory within country A. Okay, so the GNP counts what it does. It develops the supply schedule, the gross national product, considering without this country from outside. So you can look at it here. So GDP, you see this country, this is country A, plus the others, the other firms here, and I keep adding them, and I get the quantity supplied is 11, 25, 34, and 38. It's all the quantities for all the firms within our country A. GNP, notice, does not add these because they're from country F. They're from another country. So once we add those together, we get a gross national product that is smaller than the GDP because we have removed the production of this firm that happens to be within our country, but it's made by a country from outside. Okay, so that's the difference between GDP and gross national product. Okay. Now, the last thing on this video is NNP. So NNP is national net product. NNP is about a country will lose quantity as capital goods depreciate in value. So let's look at our GDP here. Okay. Or even better yet, let's look at our GNP. And let's say, for example, old machines will not produce as much output. So at each price, what this means is instead of producing 6, we'll produce 5. The machines are getting older now. Okay? So at this price, we produce 14. At this price, we produce 18. One less than here. Okay? The reason why it's one less than that is because the capital, the machinery, the things that do make the business grow and expand are getting old now, and they don't produce the same as before. They produce one less. Okay, so that is what NNP is: GDP, GNP, and real GDP and nominal GDP. Practice this, and I will assign homework so that you can see the difference. See how practicing GDP deflator can help you to find if the growth is based on. Is it based on price changes or is it based on productivity? And up here, the GNP says, is this GDP because of our domestic markets or is it because we have a lot of firms from outside the country within our country? And the NNP is about, okay, how much are we producing and how much could we produce if our capital is updated? Because if NNP is dropping, that means our capital is depreciating in value and not producing as much as it should be. Okay, thank you.